And so I look back into some of the really big cases, the big media circus cases, the OJ, the Enron, the Jason Williams, Kobe Bryant, some of those, Scott Peterson, some of those cases, they really stood out in the headlines, and they also stood out for something else. Jo-Ellan Dimitrius. She is a jury consultant who worked on all those cases and has a lot of insight, not only into how to pick a juror, but how to pick a juror in a big case that is under the media Klieg light. And I asked her the very simple question: how do you do what you do? Have a listen.
Well, doing what we do is really a matter of combining both art and science. The science part of what we do is involved in things like focus groups and mock trials, where we have a number of people and we usually do statistical analysis to see how people react to certain case facts, and if we see patterns. The art of what we do is once we get into the courtroom and being able to apply what we learn statistically, scientifically, to the folks that show up in the courtroom.
I think one of the first times I ever heard the term stealth juror was in the Scott Peterson case. And I know it probably existed before then, going back to Lizzie Borden, but can you pick out a stealth juror, a juror who wants on the case to decide a certain way before hearing any evidence?
You know, it is difficult to do so, because if a person is truly dedicated to want to come in as a stealth or hidden juror, and they're good at being somewhat deceitful in their responses, it's difficult to ascertain that. Fortunately, though, oftentimes we will, our little antennas go up if they said something in, let's say, in a juror questionnaire, and then when the attorney in the courtroom has asked them basically the same question and they give a different answer, that's an automatic cue to the consultant that perhaps something isn't quite right here. But sadly, those people who really do have a hidden agenda, unless they've gone on social media and said, I want to make sure that such and such a defendant is convicted, really that's the only way these days that I think is the accurate way of ascertaining if somebody's going to be a hidden juror.
In some cases, especially in the last, decade, and I think going back to OJ and Rodney King, race has been a massive issue coming into a trial. And you cannot strike a juror based on race. So what other attributes are you looking for to try to ascertain that a juror can be unbiased, even if he or she is the same color as the defendant?
Well, that's a very good question. And certainly one of the ways in criminal cases that oftentimes that can be exposed is through a very simple question about an individual's experience with law enforcement and their opinion about law enforcement, and whether or not that opinion has changed over a period of time, how long that person has had that opinion. Certainly, I've seen in any number of criminal cases where that's a very important factor.
Things have definitely changed over the last 10 years regarding social media, and oftentimes you can get a really good look at someone before they come into the courtroom. Has that changed a lot of your work?
It has drastically changed a lot of our work. And in fact, now I think that attorneys walk that fine line of malpractice not to get that type of information, social media information. And I've had several situations where we have learned certain things from a person's social media account that ultimately has resulted in the judge excusing the juror because that particular juror was not forthcoming about whatever the particular issue was. So again, I think it is very, very important and is an added instrument in our tool chest.
The Arbery case, if it goes to trial, and it may never go to trial for various reasons, but if it does, there will be several elements of that entire episode that will be picked apart. And the jurors may be asked to get into the mind of Mr. Arbery, and they may be asked to get into the mind of Mr. McMichael, because many of the code is actually written about what was in that person's mind.
One of the things that were I working for either side I would want to do is look at those specific requirements in the jury instructions in the verdict form and ask potential mock jurors what do they think was going through the person's mind. You may start to see a trend. So my job as a consultant is to get as many people as we possibly can in a research setting and ask them such that we may be able to use some of the language, some of their thought process, or at least the attorneys would be able to use that then in the courtroom.
So, Vinny, I found all of that so incredibly interesting, especially since, again, jury consultation just kind of started taking off after the 80s and in the 90s. But one of the things that she said that is so unique now, and this will be interesting, looking at this case as well, is that where it used to be that law enforcement was trusted, if somebody walked into a courtroom wearing a uniform, typically juries just believed the officers. But that sort of flipped. There's been a real trend towards not believing in law enforcement like people used to, or at least distrusting them. And we know that in this particular case, in the Arbery case, that's one of the features, that many people didn't trust that law enforcement made an arrest when they should have. So that's just one sort of really cool twist to how she's going to look at things this time around.
Yeah, let's take a listen, because I think we have her talking about the distrust of law enforcement.
A few years ago, it really did break down along racial lines, but more and more recently, and even with what we're going through now with the COVID pandemic, we see more people that are beginning to have questions and doubts about law enforcement. And so whereas 5, 10, 15 years ago, a question about police might have broken down along racial lines. More recently, that's not so much the case.
Yeah, she is so spot on with that, because even in the political discussion of law enforcement and what they're doing and whether their motives are always pure is being questioned by people who kind of lean to the right, people who lean to the left, and that could be a problem going forward for prosecutors, because 90% of their cases rely upon jurors believing the testimony of law enforcement.
There's another really interesting aspect she threw into the mix as well, and no one could have foreseen this, Vinny: pandemic justice. How do you choose a juror if you're doing it by Zoom? Because she's already been told that there will be some of this activity in court going forward in the coming months, that the process will have to go forward perhaps on Zoom. Well, then you don't get to see certain things about jurors that are maybe telltales. Like, you don't just listen to what they're saying, you look at what they're saying. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a body language thing, right, Vinny?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the same thing in listening to a witness, but when you're picking a jury, it's like you're evaluating credibility and body language. Let's take a listen to what she said.
I tell you, it's going to be much more difficult, because clearly what you see, what I see, is simply what the camera is showing. You don't know what's going on out here. You don't know if there's somebody over here that has flashcards that's showing me what the answer should be to a particular question. So it's very disconcerting. The other positive that might come out of it, though, is with people who aren't familiar with Zoom and the use in their home, you may be able to get lots of cues and clues about the person from what's behind them in the picture. They may not have had the good tutelage about what to put behind them, so you may learn something insightful that you might not know if they showed up in the courtroom.
That's so amazing right there, Ashley.
Right?
Leave it to Jo-Ellan, right? She's wait, what books are they reading in the
Right?
bookshelf behind them? That's amazing.
So you would think that I'm a big Clinton fan or a Colin Powell fan or another Clinton or Condi Rice or Kissinger. So you guess how I vote, right?
That's amazing, and I never thought of and maybe that's what they're going to do. I guess they're talking about it, actually picking a jury with having the prospective jurors at home, and then I guess you pick the 12 that'll come down to the courthouse eventually.
Do you know what I want to ask you, counselor? And I'm just going to totally put you on the spot with it because it just popped in my head, my silly little head. And that is, if you're the one who's called to jury service and you have to do it by Zoom, and it's going to show the inside of your home, does that constitute a Fourth Amendment infraction, like a search and seizure? Because now you can search inside my home, and I don't want you to have that right. I just blew your mind.
And you know what? That case would happen too. That case would happen. Yeah, I mean, I think we're opening a Pandora's box here. If we're having prospective jurors in their houses, that's it's bad enough we're all in our houses here, right? Which is fine. You're not. Yeah, it's crazy, but unbelievable. Great stuff tonight, Ashley. Thanks so much.